Did you know you could add buttonholes to your cardigan after it's completed? Yes, you can. Stick around to see how I added Afterthought buttonholes and buttons to my cardigan. Hey Nerdy Knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and the goal here at Nerdy Knitting is to help you become a more confident, adventurous knitter. This week I want to talk about adding Afterthought buttonholes and buttons to your hand knit cardigan. You don't always have to work your button band with buttonholes right away. When I knit this cardigan, I wasn't sure if I wanted buttons on it, so I didn't add any buttonholes. Then after I'd worn it for about a week, I realized, yeah, I kind of wanted some buttons, but I didn't want to go back and rip out the button band and redo it with buttonholes. Thankfully, I found a method for adding Afterthought buttonholes that worked out really well. So before we look at the buttonholes, I just want to talk briefly about the sweater itself. So this is the Emma cardigan version C from the Cocoknits sweater workshop book. The other two are pullover sweaters. This is an open front tunic length cardigan, and the original pattern does come with optional buttonholes and pockets, but when I knit it I wasn't sure I wanted them, so I left them out. And it's a really interesting construction. It's worked from the top down. You cast on for the back, right along the back neck. Then you're working increases to create like just the top part of the back shoulders. Then you work two front pieces right here, whether you're going to do a cardigan or a pullover, you work those. And then you join everything and you start picking up sleeve stitches and you start working in the round to get a very well-fitting sweater in the top, which is very important. No matter your size or your shape, you want your sweater to fit well in the shoulders, especially if it's a set-in sleeve shoulder. You want those set-in sleeve seam lines to be on your shoulder, not drooping down, not super tight up here. They should be on your shoulder. So this construction method's really great. It's very detailed and there's lots of great photo tutorials in the book, so she walks you through each step in the process. It's a really great way to learn about top-down sweater construction with set-in sleeves. So like I said, the pattern did include optional buttonholes and pockets, and I had decided against them because I wasn't sure I wanted them. So after I'd finished my whole sweater, I wore it for about a week. It's still chilly here and I can enjoy wearing it in the mornings, and during that time I discovered, I think I want some buttons and I think I want some pockets. So I dove in and did a bit of research and found out how I could add Afterthought buttons and pockets. Now this certainly wasn't my original idea. I found this idea in a copy of The Knitter magazine, issue 184, this exact copy right here. I was flipping through and I found tutorials for 4 different methods for adding Afterthought buttonholes. A few of them you just wrap some yarn around to make the buttonhole, and a few of them you actually cut your knitting. Now I wasn't prepared to cut, so I figured I'm going to try the wrap method. If that didn't work, then I knew I could move on and try cutting after that, but the wrap method worked out really well, even for these really large buttons. So let's take a look at the process. It's actually pretty simple to add these Afterthought buttonholes. You're going to start by deciding on the placement for your buttonholes. So I put my cardigan on and I marked out the 3 spots that I wanted for my buttons. I chose the first one right along the bust line because I knew I wanted a button there. And of course I wouldn't have any above since it's a V-neck. And then I placed the other 2 like it's at spaced intervals underneath that. And personally, I like an odd number for buttons. That's why I went with 3. And I left the bottom part open. Since it's sort of it's a tunic length, I didn't want to have a button right at the bottom. I just wanted to leave that open. So I used a stitch marker and just marked those 3 places that I knew the buttonholes and the buttons would be. I also like to place mine in the purl ditch, like sort of in between the knit stitches, because it sort of hides in between. I think that just looks a little neater. The actual buttonhole process is really simple. You just thread a length about 8 inches of yarn onto your tapestry needle. I used the yarn I used from my project. And then from the wrong side, wherever you've put one of those stitch markers, you can remove it at this point and decide where you want the hole to be. Sort of use your finger to start creating that hole and pushing the yarn to either side. And then once you have your finger sort of pushed through where that hole is supposed to be, you're going to take your tapestry needle and come from that wrong side to the right side. And bring it out, but you're going to leave a length of yarn in the back because you're going to have to weave in your ends later. Just sort of hold that there with your fingers. And then you're going to just wrap around some stitches to either side. So here I started with the purl stitches on one side. Then you're going to start wrapping. You're going to take that tapestry needle and decide how far you want to go. The magazine suggests 2 stitch ladders above where your yarn is coming out of that hole. So I started with the purl stitches that were beside it, and I chose the 2 stitch ladders. You just find like the heads of the next 2 stitches and you go down above that second one and then back up through the hole, and that's your first wrap. You want to repeat that 3 more times, so you have 4 wraps. I found that with my bulky yarn, I was better to just do 3 wraps, and that worked out just fine. And then you sort of rotate things and you do those wraps again, but on the next side near that knit stitch. So I tried to go like under the pieces of yarn, sort of the ladders of yarn between the stitches, so I wasn't right in the knit stitch. And I repeated, I went down through and back up through the hole and wrapped 3 times. And then you repeat that again, wrapping around the other purl stitches on the opposite side, deciding whether you want to go 2 ladders or a little bit further. I started with 2 on my first buttonhole, but then the buttonhole was a little tight for the buttons I had, so I went over 3 ladders instead on one side, and that opened things up a little bit more. And I wrapped just 3 times on that one, and then finishing on the other side as well. So you're just wrapping yarn around the stitches around where you want that hole to make your buttonhole. That's really all there is to it. It's not that difficult to do. Once that was done, I just practiced with my button to make sure the hole was big enough, because I knew I could take it out and make it larger, or if I had to, I could cut into my knitting. Then it was just a matter of weaving in ends and attaching the buttons on the facing band and making the other 2 buttonholes as well. So the process itself was really very simple. Now my cardigan has buttons and buttonholes, and I didn't have to plan the placement for them while I was actually knitting the cardigan. So I thought this was a really great process for adding afterthought buttonholes. If you're not quite sure you want them, then it's possible to add them after the fact. But that's not the only change I made. I also added pockets, and I didn't add them while I was knitting. Even though the pattern does have side pockets that you make with fabric and things like that, I wasn't sure I wanted them, so I left them off. And then after I'd worn the cardigan, I decided I wanted pockets, so I added those as well. So if you're interested to see how I added my afterthought pockets, click right here and I'll see you in the next video.